Okay, good evening, everybody. My name is Dr. Phil McRae, and I'm an Executive Staff Officer with the Alberta Teachers Association. And it's my distinct pleasure to welcome all of you in the Fairmont Hotel Macdonald here in Edmonton, and the thousands of Albertans and international sites that are joining us via webcast. Tonight, we are joined by two distinguished international scholars to talk about what is technology doing to our minds and bodies. And this conversation is part of an ongoing set of lectures that if you bought your tickets at learningourway.ca, you'll see we've had several speakers opening up this public conversation about the kind of Alberta that we want to shape, the kind of society we want to live in, the kinds of communities that we want to flourish in. And this particular public lecture is sponsored by the Alberta Teachers Association in partnership with the Alberta Centre for Child, Family and Community Research. And earlier today, we had 150 influential Albertans in this room spending the entire day talking about the promise and the peril of technology, specific to health, specific to education, learning environments, etc. And not only was it a very rich conversation, but it's a conversation that is only the beginning. It's something that will carry over. And we hope tonight that the public lecture and your conversations before and after are also something that you find engaging and rewarding. So what I would like to do is just give you a little bit of background about our two speakers, and then I'll introduce Michael, who will start first. Dr. Michael Rich is an Associate Professor of Pediatrics at Harvard Medical School and Associate Professor of Society, Human Development and Health at Harvard School of Public Health. He's also the Director of the Center for Media and Child Health in Boston and has a very long and distinguished background as a pediatrician, as a filmmaker, etc. Dr. Paul Howard-Jones, our second speaker tonight, is a neuroscientist, a senior neuroscientist and lecturer in education from the University of Bristol, United Kingdom. And both of these gentlemen are amazing teachers. They take incredibly complex issues, and in a very short period of time, as you'll find out shortly, they're able to give us a sense of what technology is actually doing to our minds and bodies. So if we can put up Dr. Rich's slide. Michael came to medicine after a 12-year career as a filmmaker. His current areas of health research and clinical work combine his experience and expertise in medicine and media, making him the world's first mediatrician. I love that. Not just a pediatrician, but a mediatrician. In this role, he uses scientific evidence about the positive and negative effects of media to advise children and those who care for them on how to use media in ways that optimize personal development. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Michael Rich.
Thank you for the warm welcome, and thank you to the organizations, including the Alberta Teachers Association and the Norleen Foundation, who has been a longtime collaborator of ours, to bring us repeatedly to Alberta and work with you to improve the lives and the development of your kids. So thank you for all that you do in the behalf of the children. So what I want to do today is talk briefly about reframing our relationship with media. And I would say that every single one of us in this room has preconceptions about what TV does, what the internet does, what cell phones do to our kids. And I would say that for the most part, they're driven by values, right and wrong. Television is the boob tube or the idiot box. It makes our kids fat, stupid, and mean. And I think that we want to take a step back from our preconceptions and look at the evidence, use science, use what we know for how we interact with these media, because they're not going away. So take a look at this image, and I want to ask you, are these kids, oops, it's not advancing, learning or falling behind? Think about the way you would answer that, and let's talk a little bit about the way media fits into the lives of our kids. Now, I'm going to give you data from national data from the United States. These data pretty well parallel Canadian data, but we did a national survey of across the US, or it was done actually by the Kaiser Family Foundation 2 years ago, and found out that essentially 100% of American homes have televisions in them. Even homes without running water have televisions in them. Probably not a surprise to you. But here's what else we found out. More homes have 7 or more TVs than have 1. 45% say the television is on all or almost all the time that someone is at home. 63% have it on during meals. 75% of 0 to 1-year-olds, infants, watch TV or DVDs, and they average on a typical day an hour and 54 minutes, compared to 23 minutes they spend being read to. Is this a good thing or a bad thing? How does this affect their development? So why are kids using screens so much? Well, interestingly enough, when you ask parents, pretty much uniformly they believe that they need media early and often to be able to compete in the world that they're going to live in and work in. There are a couple of problems with that. Number one is the world that they're going to compete and live in, it will be unrecognizable from the technology they're using today. Remember, the iPad is only just 2 years old right now. Look at how it has transformed society. Interestingly, 32% of parents believe TV helps their kids, 34% believe it harms their kids, 33% believe that it makes no difference. Pretty interesting in splitting that evenly. Even more interestingly, these beliefs have absolutely no relationship to their rules and expectations for media use in their homes, for how long kids are using media, what media they're using. And interestingly, only 6% of parents have any clue of what pediatricians and child development specialists recommend for media use. And that's where we, as pediatricians and child developmentalists, have failed them. So one big question is, do babies learn from TV? When we started this research, this was the #1 baby shower gift in the United States. And so the question we asked, following kids from birth to age 3, was, does their screen time influence their ultimate IQ at age 3? We did visual and verbal IQs, and interestingly enough, we found that those kids who watch more TV had lower IQs at age 3. Oh my God, TV must be toxic. It must be melting their brains. But the reality is that when we looked at the other data, the other influences that we know influence IQ, such as maternal and paternal education, reading to your child, a parent at home, interacting and verbalizing with your child, even breastfeeding, the independent effects of screens disappeared completely. So I'm not saying that they're neutral. What I am saying, though, is that it may be a marker for a whole host of parenting decisions that are made. And the way that we use TV relates to the other things we do with our kids, whether we read to them, et cetera, et cetera. So what does the growing infant brain need? If we're going to understand what is helpful to the brain and whether media are helpful, we need to know what works. Well, neurodevelopmental research is going slowly, but it is going, and we are learning a lot. And we know that there are 3 things that are absolutely essential to optimizing the developing brain. Remember, the human brain is arguably the most complex brain in the animal kingdom. But we start off, in many ways, as the most helpless animal in the animal kingdom. We can't get warm. We can't find food. We can't even recognize mom or dad. And we are entirely dependent on the adults in our lives to keep us alive and take care of us. But what happens is we get to not trade away any circuitry to primitive survival reflexes. We get to build our brain in the context of the environment in which it will function. So we get to build our brain in response to the challenges. The 3 things that we know are essential to this are interacting with other human beings, manipulating the physical environment, stacking up those blocks or getting the Cheerio into your mouth, and free play, open-ended, problem-solving, creative play. And unfortunately, screen media are essentially impoverished in all 3 of these environments. So these are not ideal environments, particularly for very young children during the first 2 years of life, where they're tripling their brain size and pruning away a lot of unnecessary or unused circuitry. So the question is, if they're not getting these things and they're substituting a less rich environment, a less challenging environment, are they pruning away circuitry they may need in the future? I'm sure many of you have seen this. Look at how smart my baby is. He knows how to work an iPad. It's not how smart the baby is, it's how smart Steve Jobs and his crew are. Because this is, in some ways, the most transparent interface with a screen that we have. And it's brilliant. But one of the things we know from a lot of research now is that under the age of about 30 months, no significant learning occurs. Kids can mimic things, sometimes requiring many repetitions on a screen, but learning does not occur. So we're not getting much on the benefit side of the risk-benefit analysis that we do when we make choices for our children. And unfortunately, because of that, or not unfortunately, but because of that, since 1999, the American Academy of Pediatrics has recommended no screen media under the age of 2. And you would not believe the amount of complaints and pushback we got when that recommendation first came out. How can I get dinner on the table if I can't put my kid in front of the television? So the question is, how did we as a species survive without eating until 1947? Right? What are they learning? Well, we now have over a generation of experience with Sesame Street, which is a wonderful, very well-researched and constantly researched and improved educational program designed for kids ages 3 to 5. And what we know is that kids who watch Sesame Street, ages 3 to 5, in fact, are more ready for school. They have more pre-reading and pre-math skills, and most robustly, they are more pro-social than kids who watch either entertainment TV or no TV, because they have been exposed to a world that is diverse, that has problems, that has letters and numbers in it. And we have been able to go back to kids later in life that watched Sesame Street and find that at 17 years, essentially high school seniors, they are less aggressive, they place more value on achievement, they read more, they have higher grades, and they're more creative. Now, I will warn you that once again, this may be a marker for a whole host of parenting choices. This is not because of Sesame Street. But Sesame Street is part of a lot of things that a parent made a choice of. I'm going to have you watch Sesame Street instead of, say, Power Rangers. But unfortunately, they're not all watching Sesame Street. And I'm going to show you a little video clip now of an experiment that was done by a psychologist colleague of ours in Minnesota, showing to a group of preschool kids the two most popular children's television shows of the time.
We took our cameras to a local daycare site, hid the cameras, and filmed the kids watching current shows of Barney and then Power Rangers. The kids reacted to Barney with,
which color do you like best?
one little boy was especially. Watch how the kids interact once the show is over. They used the maracas to make music. After watching the Power Rangers, the change was immediate and automatic. While some kids exploded, others were transfixed, clearly identifying with different characters. The Power Ranger message of beating someone up for a good cause was lost. The group disintegrated. Remember, here are the kids with Barney.
What else do I see?
Here are the kids with Power Rangers. What had been instruments after Barney were now weapons. Even the guy who was on the sidelines and enthusiastically joins in the group mayhem.
Well, my son was one of the ones that was sitting quietly throughout the whole thing, and now he's bouncing around, hitting people, and, just acting crazy.
So one of the things that we've learned time and again is that all media are educational. It doesn't need that label slapped on it by Sesame Street or by Baby Einstein. All media are educational. What differs is what they teach and how well they teach it. So these kids were learning from Power Rangers just as much as they were learning from Barney. And this extends into, older ages as well. And it is a cumulative effect over time. One of the areas that we know the most about is violence in media. It's been studied since the 1950s, and we have collected as part of our database of research at the Center on Media and Child Health over 1,000 papers that have done a good, rigorous look with a variety of disciplines at violence. And what we see time and time again, virtually unanimously, is one or more of three outcomes. The first of which is an increase in fear and anxiety. If you think about it, an average evening of primetime television, you will see more violence than you will see in your entire life. So it inflates the apparent prevalence of violence in the world. And particularly for younger kids, we are seeing these kids coming in with nightmares, sleep disturbances, bedwetting, even post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms in kids who've never witnessed actual violence. We now have more kids on psychiatric medications than we ever have in history, including anti-anxiety, antidepressants, attention deficit drugs. What happens to all of us is we become desensitized. We are an adaptable organism. If you put us at high altitude, we'll make lots of red blood cells. If you put us in an environment that's soaked in violence, we'll cease to care about, we'll cease to be frightened by, we will cease to notice the suffering of others. And in fact, we will be entertained by it. And finally, in some, and this is the least prevalent response, but the one that worries people the most, in some children, we see an increase in aggressive thoughts and behaviors. Now, after horrible events like the Columbine High School shootings in 1999, we are quick to jump on, oh, it's because of the violent video games they played or the violent movies they watched, etc. But the reality is that, first of all, school shootings, as tragic as they are extremely rare events. Second of all, the evidence does not point to the fact that these kids are copycatting something they saw. But in fact, what they were doing with the media was actually just reinforcing and validating thoughts, behaviors they already had. But we do have a real epidemic in our schools and our communities that this may have a relationship to, and that is bullying. And bullying research tells us that we need three components for bullying to occur. You need a bully, you need a victim, and you need bystanders. People who will let it go on. People who will clap or cheer or encourage it. And look at how these three map onto the three outcomes we see from violent entertainment. So the question I throw to you, and the question that we are researching, is are we entertraining our children to expect and survive in that world? What we feed a child's mind is as important as what we feed her body. We have huge infrastructures in place to protect and be upfront and transparent about our food supply. We can walk down a supermarket aisle, read the cans, read the labels, know exactly what we're putting in our kids' bodies. We do not have the same system in place for what we're feeding their minds and what we are creating as the grist for the kids they will become and the adults they will become. What we see with violence is repeated again and again with smoking, with drinking, with drugs, with sex, with eating disorders and body image. So what is happening here? To jump to the next leg up of childhood, is she connecting or is she at risk? And as with the television, both may be occurring. And what we need to do is use the data, use the research we have to inform knowledgeable choices, empowered choices with what we're going to do with these media. This was a National Geographic that some of you may have seen from last fall that got into the science of the teenage brain, and we are learning a lot about the teenage brain. And one of the interesting things is that media, today's media environment, provides a very fertile environment for the tasks of adolescent development. Think about it. It's the first time in their lives they've been able to do abstract thinking. So they become altruistic. They become all interested in social justice. And the Occupy movement, which spread around the world, started as a tweet in Vancouver, British Columbia. This is a rich environment for making things happen. Kids seek entertainment, experience and sensation in their entertainment. And that is why they go to video games about violence, about other parts of the world, about things that they don't experience, professional sports. This is actually a frame from a video game that is given away for free at U.S. Army recruiting headquarters, that U.S. tax dollars paid for the development of, and kids go and play to understand what the environment of combat would be like. Kids also seek independence. That's why they're texting while they're sitting beside you instead of talking to you. They seek independence from you. They seek who they are. And it becomes also a rich environment for forming your identity and understanding that you may not be such a weirdo. If you remember, in adolescence, you always think you're a weirdo. Everybody thinks they're outsiders. And for those kids who are marginalized because of any one of a number of features, they have a community online that they can reach out to. And this speaks to another key thing, is once they've identified themselves and built their identity, they seek connection. Facebook is now the third largest nation on earth. So how are they using their time? These are those national data we talked about at the beginning, 8 to 18 years old. And when you look at a pie chart of the typical 24-hour day, it looks pretty diverse until you break it down by type of activity and you realize that active media use occupies a huge chunk of their day, more time than they are in school, certainly more time than they're with parents, etc. As of 2010, the 8 to 18-year-olds on average use media for 7 hours and 38 minutes of every day. And because when we first started collecting these data in the 1990s, cell phones weren't what they are now, we collected those data separately. So they are also adding on another half hour of talking and an hour and a half of texting on top of that 7 hours and 38 minutes. And they're not sitting on the couch and watching TV anymore. This is how they use media. They multitask for 28% of the time with, theoretically their homework open on the computer in front of them, but there are a couple of windows open behind it, I guarantee it. One of the great things about this image is that when I was speaking to a group of kids a while back, a girl raised her hand and said, "What's that white curly thing going across the room?" I've got to get updated, don't I? But with this multitasking, what they are exposed to is 10 hours and 45 minutes of content every day. And part of what we do not know and are seeking to learn is what are the relative effects of media that you're paying primary attention to as opposed to those that are in the background. Because you could argue that, well, if you're watching a violent movie, maybe you're learning about violence. There's also a good argument, since we know from the research that this is not about watching media and imitating it, but it's about shifting our norms and our expectations for the way to behave. Maybe the media where the mayhem is going on over here while we're working on our homework may be getting in without the critical filters in place and may actually have more of an effect on us. So let's learn from history. If we go back a century and look at the things that cause morbidity and mortality in kids, the things that kids died from, the top 3 causes outside of the birth period, were infectious diseases, birth defects, and cancer. Things that doctors could do nothing about. We didn't even have antibiotics, let alone understand the human genome. But when we looked at the environments in which kids were living and growing up and found that they were crowded, they were dirty, they were polluted, and we took social measures to clean up that environment, those problems dropped dramatically. They were prevented. They weren't treated. They were prevented. Well, fast forward to today, the leading causes of death are very different. Injury, homicide, and suicide are the 3 leading causes of death in the under 24 crowd. Not only that, but big-time, life-sapping, long-term morbidities such as obesity, substance use, from tobacco to alcohol to illegal drugs, risk-taking, sexual risk-taking, all kinds of various behaviors are acquired and started in childhood and adolescence. So these are very different. These are acquired health risk behaviors. When you ask the experts, the kids, where they learn about health, nutrition, relationships, survey after survey, they list entertainment media as their first or second most important source of information. Before parents, before schools, before religious leaders, etc. So maybe instead of looking at television, the internet, the cell phones as vectors of either bad or, in the case of many folks in education who are essentially blindly embracing technology because it's there, maybe we should look at these not as vectors but as part of the environment in which kids are growing up, as the air they're breathing, the water they're drinking, and let's use them in ways that are focused and mindful and make them better, make them become who they want to become, and make the world better, rather than simply, I love it or I hate it. Can there be too much media time? Well, we saw a lot of media use, and one of the things we know from a number of studies is that there is what we call in medicine a dose-response relationship between the average amount of screen time and your risk of obesity. With each successive hour, you become at higher risk for overweight. And when you go back to those national data we collected in 2010 and divided into what we call tertiles, or thirds, the first thing that's interesting, and this is the amount of cumulative exposure time, that 10 hours and 45-minute average, is the breakpoints are that light users are only 3 hours or less a day. The heavy users are 16 hours or more a day. Remember, there's a third on either side of those. And we asked them all three questions. Do you get good or fair to poor grades, C's and below? Do you get in trouble a lot? And how happy are you? How content are you in life? And what we found is that in each of them, the heavy users had twice the rate of those who were light users. Now, again, not necessarily causal. This is a correlation. And one could easily see that kids who were unhappy, had low personal contentment, might sit in front of a screen more than kids who didn't. So what we are probably seeing is something of a cyclic effect, that we sit in front of screens because we're feeling dissatisfied, and maybe what we're seeing changes us and teaches us in ways that make us more dissatisfied, and the cycle continues. I am seeing more and more kids who come in with the complaint of falling asleep in school, not doing well in school. And when you run through what's going on, kids today are sleeping with their cell phones under their pillow or on the bedstand beside them. And when you ask them, why do you do that? They say, oh, that's my alarm clock. Like they didn't have alarm clocks before cell phones, right? And what they're doing is that they want to always be connected because it is a 24/7 environment out there for gaming, for gossip, for instant messaging, for Facebooking. And so they are getting less sleep, and not only less sleep because they're texting, staying up late to text, but they're getting poorer quality sleep because they're waiting for that vibrator to go off underneath their pillow. And they're not getting into the deep stage 4 deep REM sleep where we move what we experience today from our short-term memory centers into our learning centers. And so even if they're staying awake in algebra class tomorrow, they may not remember what they learned yesterday because they hadn't completed that cycle. So they are always online. And what is happening online? Well, if we go back to the kids, you know how you always go in and the teenager says, I'm working on my English paper, and it's right there in front of them on the screen. Well, when we actually asked them what they did and how much time they spent on the computer and what they did with it, they said that they spent 16 minutes doing homework, over an hour downloading videos and music, and an hour and a half social networking and gaming. And it's not entirely benign environment. 42% of 10 to 17-year-olds have ended up on porn sites. 4% have been asked for sexual pictures of themselves by people they didn't know on the internet. 42% of 4th to 8th graders have been victims of cyberbullying. And unlike bullying, where you knew who the bully was, the powerful one, the big kid who gave wedgies to the little kids on the playground, or the in-girls who ostracized the out-girls and did psychological warfare, there is a huge overlap between bullies and victims in cyberspace because the power differential is not clear. So what we're finding is that 58% they've said they've received and 53% say they've sent hurtful messages. Much more overlap than in the offline bullying environment. 58% of kids involved with cyberbullying have never even mentioned it to a parent or another adult in their life. That is not because they are keeping it a secret from us. It is because they are convinced that we have no clue what to do about it, because we are so clueless in that environment. And in many ways, by saying, just go watch TV and let me finish the dinner, or just go online, just do your Facebooking. I don't really understand it, but as long as you're not selling drugs on the corner, I'm happy with it. What we've done is we have abdicated our responsibility to parent them in the digital domain, and we've already seen how much time they spend in the digital domain. We can't do that. We have to become clueful, not clueless. So here's an interesting experiment that was done last year. Took 1,000 college students, 10 countries, 5 continents around the world, and asked them to go offline for 24 hours. No TV, no cell phone, no internet for 24 hours. And what's interesting is, in this globalized environment, the responses were remarkably consistent around the world. I literally did not know what to do with myself from the UK. I can't use my cell phone. I can't live without media from Chile. I felt lonely, as if I was in a small cage on an island. I love this. It's like a haiku, right? Sometimes I felt dead from Argentina. Media is my drug. Without it, I was lost. How can I survive 24 hours without it? And then from the good old US of A, I was itching like a crackhead because I did not use my phone. So the question that comes up is there such a thing as addiction to or addictive behavior around these media? Well, there's a huge debate about that in the medical community, but if you go to DSM-4 criteria, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Psychiatry, and you look at the definitions of addiction, you see that it's excessive use, it's increasing tolerance to that use and needing to use it more and more, it is withdrawal symptoms, and it is the acceptance of negative consequences in order to, continue their behaviors. And we see this. And there are countries in this world, most notably in Asia and to a certain degree in Europe, that have recognized this. And in Korea, where internet addiction disorder is a known diagnosis, they have 250,000 young people under the age of 18 under treatment today. And they estimate that's about 10% of those that are at risk. We see it again in Taiwan, in China, in various other Asian countries. Those who meet criteria for an internet addiction disorder in Korea, in the US, those in the US who meet those criteria show more obsessive compulsive tendencies, more depression, anxiety, hostility, paranoid ideation, and lower interpersonal sensitivity. And perhaps even more interestingly, there's a much higher prevalence of internet addiction disorder behaviors in kids with attention deficit disorder. Now, those of you who are educators or who have kids with attention deficit know that the computer is often a very much more controllable and useful environment for learning than the chaos of a classroom or a lecture hall. But we're also seeing that they're getting sucked into these worlds of gameplay and of the internet much more completely in some ways. Interestingly enough, their symptoms subside with gameplay. They actually can have more attention on standardized tests after playing games or while playing games than without. And if you take those who do not have attention deficit but have internet addiction disorder criteria and give them Ritalin, their symptoms subside. So there's some shared circuitry here, something is going on. And yet despite that, internet addiction disorder is not an accepted diagnosis in North America, which means that we don't have a medical psychiatric infrastructure for treating these kids. And these kids are suffering, and their families are disrupted. And it's a very real thing. I'm seeing 1 to 2 kids a week whose chief complaint is, I'm addicted to the internet or to video games. So let's go back to those so-called normal kids, those 1,000 kids around the world, 2 weeks after they went through a day of media abstinence. It was unpleasant to realize I'm in a constant state of distraction from Mexico. When you really get off the media, you realize how many quality things you can do from Lebanon. I love this. I interacted with my parents more than usual. Imagine that. And I've lived with my best friends for 3 years. This is the best day we've ever spent together. There are families now who are initiating what they call a digital Sabbath. 24 hours offline. And they're talking to each other more, they're playing outside more, they're going for hikes, they're actually discovering each other again. So this is something that maybe, even without that diagnosis, we can do for all of us and for ourselves and our communities, is to take time off. Not because it's bad or it's evil, but because it distracts us from all those other things that we might be doing at the same time. We need that empty space to fill. And speaking of which, we can now map the human brain by putting people in an MRI tube and having them do activities and see what parts of the brain activate in real time. They tap their fingers together, or they sing a tune, or they look at the color red. And one of the things that's very interesting about this is that at one point, researchers turned on the MRI in between tasks when the subject was sitting there in the tube staring at beige plastic 6 inches from their face, when their mind was wandering. And think about what happens when your mind wanders. Let's say you saw that color red on a cardboard as your last stimulus, and you remember, that makes you remember, oh, the tomatoes in my garden are going to have to be picked because if they don't, they'll rot. And I'll make tomato sauce, and I'll make Grandma's recipe, but Grandma died last year, and that makes me feel sad. And I remember that I met a cousin I never knew at that funeral. And our mind goes from memory to sensation to thought to idea, like a butterfly from flower to flower. And that is where some researchers are now working on what was originally called the default mode network, because after all, when your mind's wandering, you're not doing anything. But they are now looking at it as where we build our sense of self, where we build that unique template that makes us different from everybody else on Earth, because we have perceived and experienced different things, and we have synthesized them in different ways. Now, another interesting line of research with this so-called default mode network is around the idea of creativity. Think about what happens when you're creative. You go out and you collect divergent ideas. You go out there and you pick up this and that, and you put them together in new ways, almost like when Picasso went to the garbage dump and found pieces of bicycle and made a bull's head out of it. And one of the things that we've seen from educational research is that intelligence quotient, or IQ, that we commonly use as the gold standard of how smart you are, is really a measurement of how well we access information. And in the 100+ years since we started measuring it, the average IQ of the population has gone up every generation by 10 points. Right? We're getting smarter, right? Well, there are other kinds of intelligence, of course. There's also something called the CQ, or the creativity quotient, which was validated in the mid-50s and measured since then and has steadily gone downward every year with a steeper inflection in the early 90s. We don't know why. But perhaps it is because if we go back 100 years again to a very bored patent officer in Bern, Switzerland, who walked to work beside the river every day and looked at the eddies and swirls in the water and stamped a bunch of meaningless to him papers all day long, and walked back beside the river, went upstairs to the attic, and wrote up a little thing called the theory of relativity. Late in his life, when Einstein was asked, how did you come up with this incredibly complex and yet to be disproven theory? And he said, it's because I was bored. We need that empty space, the boredom, to be creative. And we're not giving it to our kids by constantly stimulating them with television and internet and iPads and cell phones, etc. We feel we owe it to them to constantly stimulate and feed them information. But maybe they need to reflect and learn to think about things and be bored and fill that empty space with the things that make them unique. So how do we address this? Well, these kids are incredibly good at these devices. They have been doing it literally since birth. And I love this. And we need to not block it or prohibit it or limit it or restrict it, but use it. Use their incredible facilities with the technology to help direct them toward the things we want for them and the things they're wanting for themselves. And I'm going to show you a brief clip of an a project that we've done in Vermont, in the US, with regular middle school kids, 10, 11, 12-year-olds. And the idea was that we taught them how to look at and critically use media, how to look at advertising, how to look at television, how to look at the internet, and break it down, deconstruct it, understand how it's working and what they're seeking to do with it. And then to come up with an idea and write, direct, act in, and shoot in one class period a PSA about anything they cared about. And this is an example of what they did.
Hey media, who are you to tell me how to be? Models look like this, but I don't. I am who I am, but not to be influenced to be something that I'm not. I'm gonna be myself, perfect just the way I am. This is how I look. I'm not digitally or computer altered. 13, not 21. Let me look the way I want. So look at us. We're all beautiful in our own way. And we're all teen girls. So who are you to tell us how to be?
Pretty impressive, isn't it? This is their language. This is their world. So one of the things that we seek to do beyond investigating the relationship between media and the physical and mental and social health of kids and translating that knowledge for parents and teachers and society, but is also to innovate with these same tools with the kids to help them become what they want to become. And this is an example of a research project we've done for the last 20 years where we basically gave sick kids video camcorders and asked them to teach us what it's like to live with their illness. And some interesting things happen. First of all, as you might expect, these illnesses don't behave out there in the big world the way we expect them to in our textbooks and in our hospitals and our little sterile environments. And these kids bring a lot of strength and knowledge to the table, so they become true partners in their healing. And what we have done, because we discovered not only that we learned a lot of stuff that we didn't know, but that the kids got better simply through self-expression, and they learned from each other, is that we have started to set up social media sites in which they post videos about their experience. And this is one on obesity, for example.
I think sometimes the reason why, I eat the way I eat is because either I'm mad or I'm sad or people look at me strange. I really don't know the reason why, but it's like I'll eat even if I'm not hungry. If I'm hurting, I feel that's when I eat the most, you know what I'm saying?
So this is a great opportunity for them to understand and share with each other what they only partially understand in real life, and to come together in a community of care and connection. Not only do we need to empower the digital natives, but we got to clue in we digital immigrants too. We need to give the information and strategies to parents to be able to support this change. And as a result, we have created these resources. This database of research I referred to is posted online, available to you, not because I think you should become academic scholars, because we also have it in a lay language, every single study in lay language, as well as what I call geek speak. Because we don't want to tell you how to make decisions for yourself, how to make choices for your family. We want to give you the outcomes. We want to give you what happens in the changes and make decisions for yourself. But even with that, we know that we need to bring that science to bear on real life. Now, I'm going to give you one last example of something that's driving people crazy, and that's sexting. Right? 13-year-old girl falls in love with the man she will love till the day she dies. Right? And to show her undying love, she flashes him on her cell phone. And by the time that he gets it, he's all over her. So he sends it on to 2 or 3 of his best buds. And they send it on to 2 or 3 of their best buds. And she comes into school the next day, and everybody's looking at her and calling her a slut. And what do? Well, we arrest them. Because they're child pornographers, of course. And we make them registered sex offenders. But if we take a science and evidence-based approach instead of a values-based and a punitive approach to this, let's look at what this is about. This is kids who are at the peak of their sexual urges and curiosity. They are incredibly facile with the media. They are surrounded by clueless adults, both about their sexuality and about their media use. And they have limited executive function. They're not going to even be able to do impulse control and future thinking and what we used to call the superego for another 10 years. So we can't expect them to act in responsible ways any more than we can expect a 6-month-old to walk. So what we have here is the perfect storm between human behavior that has existed probably since the earth cooled and a new environment in which we have to understand in order to help them through this. So one of the things we do is we have an online advice column for parenting in the digital age called Ask the Mediatrician. I'm the mediatrician. And what we try to do is take any question, and I've had questions from at what age and how should I introduce cell phones to my kids to how do I get my kid to quit singing Viva Viagra in the supermarket. And we try to answer those questions in a way that's based in the research, that is balanced, recognizing the positives and the strengths as well as the negatives and the pitfalls. And that is practical, something they can do at home right now without buying a book or taking a course or buying a device. And that is available either through our main website, which was there before, or askthemediatrician.org. In addition, we posted on a Facebook page, which I would urge you to go to because what happens, interestingly, there is it becomes a digital village square. And parents say, I never thought of that, I'll try it. And then they come back and they say, I tried that and I modified it this way and it works even better. And it becomes a way to crowdsource parenting in this digital environment because we don't have all the answers. And as I say to parents of kids, get real. Parenting is an art, not a science. It is an imperfect art. You will make mistakes, so forgive yourself and get on with it. And make it better all the time. Let's learn from each other. Let's share ideas. Let's do better because we are dealing with ever-changing kids in an ever-changing environment. So to wrap it up, what matters is 5 things. The message of the media the kids are using. Is it about violence? Is it about, healing? The environment in which it is used. It is very different to watch a sexy movie with your girlfriend or with a bunch of guys hooting and hollering or with mom, right? And that provides a context for even stuff that is questionable to become the source of discussion with parents, with teachers, with people who can guide them. There's a huge controversy right now about the Hunger Games. Huge hit about a bunch of kids killing each other. Developmental stage. The age of the kid, what a 2-year-old can comprehend and deal with is very different than what a 12-year-old or a 22-year-old can. And we have to be aware that their brains are very different. They do not understand the difference between fantasy and reality until they're about 7 or 8. No matter how many times they parrot, I know it's only make-believe. Their visceral responses are exactly the same to both. The information that we bring to this transaction between media and our kids helps us. The information you're getting tonight, and hopefully we'll get in the future by using our resources, will help you to have an informed response to these things rather than stop it because I say so. Go do your homework. And finally, the amount that kids use is important. It is, at best, displacing things that may be better for them at that point in time. So we have posted for you, and this is essentially this last slide, is online we have handouts, if you will, for 3 age groups, preschoolers, school-age kids, and adolescents that all work with this media acronym to understand how best to manage this. They're tips for how to manage this in your kids' lives, and that is also available through our website for free. And I urge you to let your kids get outside, climb trees, wiggle their toes in the mud, maybe fall out of the trees and break their arms, because I would rather see a child's arm be broken than their spirit be broken. Thank you very much.
How is that for a thoughtful and insightful presentation? Please join me again in thanking Dr. Michael Rich. So we have some time for questions. If you want to ask some questions, we have 3 mics on either side of the room. We have a couple of online questions that I'll be asking here. So as you make your way to the microphones on either side or at the back, just to give you a little bit of context, Michael was in Rio de Janeiro on Friday. He landed in Edmonton at 2 in the morning, got to the hotel at 3:30, was up at 8 a.m. with 150 influentials in this room, has worked all day, went for dinner, came on stage, and he looks pretty darn good, doesn't he? So I'm impressed. Yeah, that deserves a hand. So I have a question off the webcast from Alex in Calgary, and it says, Swedish state-founded research has shown a direct connection between exposure to high voltage frequency and leukemia. It forced the World Health Organization to change its policies. Can we really learn in this environment? So what about electromagnetic frequencies and some of this discussion around high voltage and electronics?
Well, what the research showed was, in fact, cellular changes. And part of the concern is cell phones next to the heads of kids. And as we may or may not know, cell phones emanate radiation. They don't receive radiation. They send it out. That's how they are found when we call a cell phone. And there actually is good evidence of temperature changes in the neurons closest to the ear when someone is on a cell phone. We have not found definitive evidence of cancer or that nature, although we do have epidemiologic evidence of more tumors of the jaw and of the brain near this. But the jury is still out on it. It does not, as far as I know, affect learning per se. But all of this stuff that we just talked about may very well, because I would argue that we learn from everything. And I think the learning issue is, what's really important is we have deluded ourselves by the artificial distinction we draw between education, which we put a lot of focus and resources and energy into getting our kids the best education, and then we let them come home at the end of school and play Call of Duty for 3 or 4 hours, because after all, it's only entertainment. They're not learning anything. The reality is that kids are learning things all the time. They are learning about the world, the way it works, and the way they should behave in it. So I am less concerned about high voltage radiation in terms of learning. I'm concerned about it in terms of tumor formation. But I am concerned about how we have convinced ourselves that somehow, just because we know it's make-believe, which we may or may not, that we aren't changing our view of the world and what our expectations are for that world.
Thank you. If you could just let us know your name.
Alan Garber. Our children seem to intuitively understand how to solve problems using computer programs. They're, in fact, always guiding us as parents in how to do things. And I'm wondering if their exposure to this type of technology actually changes the way their brains are actually wired, for lack of a better word, because they seem to intuitively understand that things that my wife and I consider a complete mystery.
That's true. And I would say that all of the evidence would point to, yes, it is. And if you think about it, the way our brains are wired were changed by other technologies. Telephones completely changed the way we think about the world. Airplanes completely changed. I mean, I was in Rio on Friday, right? And, you know, I allowed, you know, myself to say, okay, I'll also come to Edmonton in a couple of days and speak. So we are changed by all the technology in our world. And this brings up a really interesting issue, which is a lot of us digital immigrants feel that, oh my God, these kids are so far ahead of us in this environment. We'll never learn. But one of the interesting things that can happen is that if you sit down on the couch next to your kid and say, let me play Call of Duty with you, or why don't you show me how Facebook works? At first they're going to go, what? But then they're going to show you how to do it. And one of the really great things about that is that they will absolutely clean your clock at the video game. They will run rings around you. And for perhaps the first time in their life, they are the master and you are the student. They are teaching you how the technology works. But what happens is you are now treating them in a respectful sort of peer environment in which they can show you how to kill zombies faster and better. And you can ask the question, so explain to me exactly why killing zombies is fun. And you can bring that prefrontal cortex executive function stuff in that they are not going to have, but is part of parenting to help them develop and sort of get them to start questioning why they do these things at the same time as you're learning how to do it with them. And so you are showing respect to them and for their expertise at the same time as they are allowing you, by virtue of the vulnerability you've shown, to make sort of observations and ideas and inject questions into their, so far, unquestioning use.
Thank you. We have another question on the other side.
Yeah, this is a question from the internet. It's from Amber in Gibbons, Alberta. Our child is in a pilot project for all-day laptop use. She's in grade 6 and will be using them for junior high as well. We're not convinced it's a good idea. Thoughts?
Hi, Amber. I think that this is not a black and white question. And I think that in many ways we've approached educational technology from as if there is a right answer. Laptops are a tool. Laptops are a tool that do certain things very well. But a pad of paper and a pencil are also a tool. A hunk of clay is also a tool. A slide rule is also a tool. And so if we step away from the specialness, I guess, that we confer on technology or these more advanced technologies, because after all, these are all technologies, and say, this is a tool. What does it do well? What does it not do as well as, say, the pad and paper or the hunk of clay? And let's use it for the things it does well, but let's also know when to turn it off and use the clay.
Thank you. We have time for 2 more questions on this side.
My name is Patrick Bonet, and I have a question. Earlier you showed a slide of the student multitasking. Research shows that people from my generation are very good at focusing and doing single tasks. Children, youth of today can multitask, but their, I guess, efficiency rate isn't as high. What's better?
Now you're asking a values-laden question. We're talking about moving away from values. They're neither better nor worse. They're different. And there are choices that we should know about and make in an informed way. You're absolutely right that multitasking allows them to jump from thing to thing to thing very quickly. And as my colleague Paul is about to tell you, there are certain things that is very good for. It improves our visual attention. It improves our ability to hold multiple things in our focus at the same time. But true multitasking probably doesn't exist. It's really more rapidly toggling from thing to thing to thing in that. And that we give away certain things when we move from thing to thing, and one of those may be reflective thinking and that ability to be creative and to sort of go within and synthesize things. So I think that, again, if you're a fighter pilot or if you are a cardiothoracic surgeon, some of that improved ability to hold multiple things in your visual field and multiple things in your attention at the same time may save some lives. But if you're a poet or a philosopher, that may not be as useful. So I think that we have to just recognize that they are different and use them in ways that are appropriate to optimize the outcome we want.
Thank you. So we actually have 2 last questions. We'll take one from this side and then one from that side, and we'll close off.
Hi, Michael. I'm Tom Keenan. It's a little tangential, but I'm reading Daniel Amen's book, From Good Brains to Great, and he makes a lot of very radical points in there about brain injury, saying, for example, you should never allow a child to hit a soccer ball with the head. And his credential, of course, is he's seen more brain scans and SPECT scans than anyone else on Earth. How do you feel on that? Do you think we should keep our kids from hitting soccer balls and playing football?
Well, I don't think that concussions are a good thing for children. I'll say that right out front.
He's talking sub-concussion level.
Exactly, and I think that I'm certainly not advocating that, but I'm also saying that there are giveaways when we seek to pack our children in cotton wool. There are giveaways when we put Peril all over our kids the moment they get any dirt on them, right? There are giveaways when we tell a kid, don't climb that tree, you might fall out and break their arm. So I think that we, again, have to, as with all choices in parenting, balance the risks and the benefits of everything. And that risk-benefit analysis is going to be different for every parent and every family. But I think that we have to recognize that injury is a part of childhood. One of the things that we discovered, we put a lot of resources into playground improvement to make playgrounds safer, that rubberized stuff that's on the ground, and the fact that there are no seesaws in playgrounds anymore. And all of this is largely driven by insurance costs. An interesting thing has happened. The rate and severity of injuries in playgrounds has not changed. Kids are being kids. And if kids have to push it farther to break their arm, they will do it, right? So I think that we can be informed about it. We can put the bike helmets on the kids because that doesn't keep them from riding the bike. But I worry that if we are saying, well, you can't play soccer, or don't ever head the ball in soccer because you might get a subclinical concussion and it will damage your brain. You know what? That's part of childhood. And injury is something that happens. And I do think that we have to question whether making our kids completely safe from everything is the best environment in which they should grow up.
Thank you. Interestingly, today, too, with the 150 people across 70 organizations that came here, unstructured play was one of the areas that a large proportion of the group had said we need to look more into in going forward in the future. Last question.
My name's Catherine, and I'm curious about maybe the next stage. You stopped with teenagers, but university students are expected to spend a great deal of time glued to their computers because of the way things are set up, online lectures, online assignments, online everything, and I think that's an expectation. So I'm curious about how, as educators, we can set these expectations differently so that students have an option to not be stuck on their screens.
Well, I think the fact that you're thinking about it and asking the question is exactly where we need to go. I think that where we get in trouble is when we blindly embrace or blindly reject these technologies without evidence, without sort of data on which to choose them. And I think that we have to understand that kids and young adults all learn differently. And for some kids, the online environment is a better space, particularly kids with attentional problems. And for others, it's not. They need the hands-on, direct interaction. So I think that what we need to be doing is asking these questions, looking for the data, and instead of just saying, well, everybody's doing laptops, so we should do it too, say, is a laptop the best tool to do the job I want to do? Because you know that half of the kids in that lecture hall who are studiously taking notes are actually being snarky about friends on Facebook instead. So I think that there are giveaways with all of this, and there are roles for all kinds of teaching and all kinds of structures, not only across a curriculum, but within a curriculum for individual students. So I think simply the fact that you ask the question is the first step.
Thank you very much. Please join me in thanking Dr. Michael Rich.